Hello,
Uh,
Shirin.
we are both tutors on the British Council courses for teachers, and we are very pleased to have you with us today. And today's topic is learner-led assessment, which was chosen by you. And we will look at, in particular, self-assessment. And today we will look at different topics than our previous sessions, self-assessment, why we do it, why self-assessment is valuable, how to use it with simple tools. We will share some examples also from our community. And as we go, please think of one idea you can try out in your classrooms from this session and from the discussions we have. So, Nelson, before we start, what is learner led assessment? What do you understand from this?
Well, I think it's any kind of assessment that involves the learners assessing themselves or each other, so self-assessment or peer assessment, where they are taking the lead in assessing their performance rather than just the teacher doing it all the time. So I think it's something that involves reflection on their part and a willingness to improve or to change or to make their performance better or their English better.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. It's usually instead of teacher doing all the evaluation, now
Hmm.
learners reflect on their progress.
Hmm.
And we would want to focus on because it's deep dive. We want to deep dive into self-assessment in this
Hmm.
session.
Hmm.
And before we talk about why self-assessment matters or what is it, I want to ask you a more personal question, Nelson. Do you self-assess yourself, or maybe how do we all self-assess in our daily lives?
Mm. Well, I think it's something that I learned to do, very early on when I became a teacher. I learned what reflection was, right, when I did my initial teacher training course. And, after I taught a lesson, I had to reflect on what went well and what things perhaps weren't so effective and what I could do to improve in my next lesson, right? So, the same way that teachers have to reflect to enact change or to change their performance, so do learners have to reflect to make their skills better or their communication strategies better or to learn the language better. So it's not something just that teachers do. It's everybody who wants to improve at any skill that they want to improve. So it's that kind of self-reflection. So just some time for me to think about what I just did and to evaluate as objectively as possible how I did. So I think it's a very important skill for everybody, for adults and also for younger learners to develop.
Yes, absolutely. And we would like to say hi to our community members joining this session from Morocco, Algeria, Mauritius, Spain. So, welcome everyone. And yes, I totally agree with you. We actually do it all the time.
Hmm.
Say when we look back at a lesson we taught or a conversation we've had, and even in our daily lives, for example, when we are cooking and think, okay, next time I will add a bit of less salt. So it's the same process of
Yes,
reflecting, evaluating, and improving.
that's right.
And
Yeah.
yeah, well, self-assessment. How do you define? I mean, we defined it that it's a reflection process.
Yes. Yes.
So, are there different types of assessment? What are they assessing? So, do you have an idea about what kinds of things we ask them to assess?
Well, it could be a piece of writing that they've done. It could be a communicative task that they've done. It could be anything that we give them to do in the classroom. I think it's important to kind of do it often and to help your learners to self-assess because it's not something that perhaps they're used to do. Perhaps it's not something that they've been trained to do. So I think it's important to think about the process of reflecting and the process of self-assessing, as well as the product or how accurate their self-assessment was. So for me, it's very, very important to focus on the process before I I expect them, to have a very accurate self
Mm.
assessment of themselves. So I think that when you think about the common challenges that people have with self assessment, is because they don't know how to do it. So it is a process. We need to support them. We need to be there and give them feedback so that they can self assess more accurately the more they do it.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. It's also connected to their, which we call metacognition. So,
Mm,
um, this is about this part of our brain, which is responsible for planning, decision making, monitoring. So, it's about thinking. So, when
mhm,
we actually self assess, we help them become more self regulated learners. And then in the future, this will help them plan more. In a better way, reflect on their performance and efforts.
mhm,
This was also mentioned in the community members. They mentioned that we first discuss how we train learners to self assess and
mm,
consider appropriate procedures and techniques. So, I also had a chance to discuss that with a group of teachers this week. They mentioned that, for example, their learners resist identifying their mistakes, or
mm,
um, it's because it's maybe how we introduce this task. So the purpose is to reflect and see mistakes as part of learning process,
mm.
or um, not to make it too stressful. Maybe we can start with more positive reflections. Um,
Yes. Yes, absolutely. I think it's that sensitivity, right, that learners have about being honest about their performance. If they find something difficult, or a task or a piece of writing that they weren't very happy about, they might be more resistant to self assess, because they don't want to lose face with in front of the teacher. And there's also ego involved, right? We're all human, and there's an element of ego that we don't want to kind of let people down. So I think the first thing that we need to do is to create that atmosphere, that environment where learners feel safe in order to self-assess. Our community members said, for example, that self-assessment or learner-led assessment is more effective when the classroom environment is supportive and respectful, right? So we have to build that trust. They have to feel safe with each other, and also with the teacher, in order to self-assess better. And also, another community member says that first we discuss how we train learners to self-assess and consider appropriate procedures and techniques. So it's all a process of building those elements around in the classroom for them to be able to do it more accurately, and also more meaningfully, I think. Yeah.
yes, in a
Mm.
supportive way.
Hmm.
It's about that growth mindset.
Hmm.
So we talked about some challenges. Um, they may not know. Yes, our learners may not know. Lack of time sometimes
Hmm.
is an issue, and it's about consistency. So this is also
Hmm.
mentioned in the comments. So it's a continuous process. So
Hmm.
um, it takes a bit of time, but there are some practical tools and techniques also that can help us for self-assessment.
Hmm.
What are your favorite tools? How do you ask your learners to self assess?
Well, for the primaries, I usually use smileys, so they have to color in, or they have to choose either a very smiley face, or a not so smiley face, or a sad face, and then perhaps maybe also use um, for example, numbers. Yeah, if they want to circle a number, so it's very similar to the smileys. So rating, their performance. Also, maybe using 2 stars and a wish, where they say something that they did well, something that two things that they did well, and perhaps one thing that they would like to improve that they didn't do so well. Um, Hi, Shirin. So we were just talking about using smileys or emojis. I also mentioned two stars and a wish. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I think it's very engaging. So two things they did well, and one thing that
I
they
didn't
need to
like.
work on. Yeah.
Mhm.
Perhaps our community members can also write down in the chat what activities they use in the classroom to self-assess. Um, I think thumbs up and down and sideways as well is also very effective, and it can be done straight after um, an activity. Um, do you have any favorites?
Yeah, I actually brought one here. So, traffic lights. So, this was also mentioned by
Hmm.
the community members.
Hmm.
So, for example, they can hold some cards like this. Uh,
Hmm.
so, green means
Yeah.
um, I understand, or I can do it. With some, you
Yeah.
can do this. With some, can do statements.
Hmm. Hmm.
Orange means I need help, or yeah, I need more practice. It could be
Yeah.
also yellow.
Hmm.
And red means I don't understand, I need
Yeah.
help.
Yeah.
So these could be cards, or yeah, there are different ways we can ask them hold these.
Hmm.
In group work, if we identify those with green, then they can help those with the red card also. Within
Yes.
group work, we can also
Yes.
encourage them for peer learning.
That's a really nice idea. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, there are some other activities. Drawing emojis you mentioned.
Hmm.
Exit tickets also help them. I,
Yes.
yeah, there are so many simple tools that can help us quickly. Like 5 fingers, they can show 5 finger means they understand,
Hmm.
um, or one means they need more help. So I think what these help us also, these kinds of tools help us see, um, give feedback about our instruction as well.
Hmm.
So what we need to cover again next. So if the
Yes.
priority is the red, then that means this requires more support. This topic
Hmm.
needs to be um,
That's right. Yes.
needs
So their self-assessment helps us to self-assess ourselves too, right?
exactly,
So
yeah.
it's mutually beneficial. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, I think our community members have mentioned sorry, pains and joys through snowballs, traffic lights, as you mentioned as well, um, or using flags. Okay, it's a similar idea: red flags, blue flags, yellow flags. The red means, oh, I need some help. Um, and the yellow, maybe I need a little bit more support.
Mhm.
Also, learning journals.
Nice.
That's a nice idea as well, to give them some time to reflect. Um, we can help them if they're very low level or younger learners. We can give them stems. Yeah. So one thing I learned today. Yeah, and they only have to write maybe 2 or 3 words to finish the sentence. Um, or if they're higher level, yeah, then they can write a longer reflection, and that is an excellent way as well for us to self-assess our lessons by reading their reflections.
And also maybe dear
Yeah.
me letters. I like those letters that
Hmm.
they can then save those letters and open at the end of the term.
Yes, that is really nice. Or post-its as well. They can
Mhm.
write their self-assessment on post-its, yeah, and then they
Mhm.
can put it at the back of the classroom for the teacher to have a look at. So they're all very nice ways of getting them to think about, not only what they found difficult or what they think they've improved, but also what they're going to do about it, right? So there needs to be a follow up. There needs to be an action plan. So for their self assessment, if there's something they found difficult or something that they need to work on, then they also need a plan. So next lesson, I will. Yeah. So for example, when I do self assessment with my secondary learners, um, they need to self assess their writing before I give them feedback. So they have to complete some sentence stems, like one thing I did well, one thing that was more difficult. Yeah? And then after I give them feedback on their writing, yeah, they need to compare their self assessment with my assessment, and then they need to reflect again and tell me one thing I was right about. So if we both agree on something, they were right about it. One thing I didn't think about was, so perhaps something that they, didn't know they had to improve, and I told them. And then the last is, therefore, I will. And this is the most important thing about self-assessment: is what are they going to do about those areas that they need to work on, and they tell me what their action plan is. So,
Exactly. This
yeah.
is actually what, our role, because I think we shouldn't assume that our learners have this skill competency. So we are building,
Mm,
and then they learn how to regulate their time, resources, learning. So this is actually extremely important for us to
mhm,
include in our planning, because
mhm.
usually if you don't plan it, this won't happen. But this is part of your daily writing practice. So
Yes.
then in that case, they build on this habits, and then they know what to do next, because otherwise they won't know. It actually also impacts their motivation, because
Mm,
motivation is about not knowing know what to do. Actually, it's about
yes.
having strategy, so they will
Mm,
know how to take the next step in this process, and then they
yes.
will have the tools and support from the teacher as well.
That's right. Yes, and it's a good point what you said about motivation. Is one of the things, perhaps, as you say, it's lack of progress or lack of perceived progress. So self-assessment develops that awareness about not only what we need to keep working on, but what I'm doing better. Right. So it kind of builds up, and it links with the previous self-assessment. So it's comparing what can I do better now that I couldn't do so well a month
Yeah,
ago. So
yeah,
it's making that progress visible, and
visible. Yeah.
because that, as you say, it feeds into motivation. So it takes time, it takes a little patience at the beginning, but it's part of their learner training, right?
Exactly.
When we think about when we train learners to read or to listen, um, we also need to think about how we are training learners to become better reflectors and better uh, assessors of their own work, right? So, for example, Shireen, what would you do, or what would you recommend that teachers do to train their learners to self-assess more accurately?
Mhm. I really liked one comment from one of our community members when we
Hmm.
discussed this on the community. So I will read the comment, summarize the comment. So the
Hmm.
teacher first helps student learners understand what good quality work looks like by showing two examples and asking which one
Mm.
is better and why. And
Hmm.
then learners work in small groups using a few simple criteria, or maybe they can prepare their own criteria to judge the
Hmm.
samples, to evaluate the samples.
Hmm.
And after that, they think about where they learn work fits with this work, and complete the self-assessment. But this is about the product. So, for example,
Mm.
they will say, I used vocabulary recently learned, I checked my pronunciation, I checked spelling.
Hmm.
But in that case, it's about the product. We can also ask some questions about how they, whether they ask questions when unsure, whether they asked for help or kept trying even when it was difficult. So I think the first training is to experience it, to experience
Hmm.
this process, and see that it's part of their learning, and so that they connect success to the effort.
Mm. Hmm.
So they should experience this first, and uh,
Yes.
see that even though they don't tick all the boxes, this they won't be judged, or they can redo and resubmit, and
Mm.
they can learn from their mistakes. So I think
Yes.
we should
Mhm.
give them this space and opportunity first, as part of
Mm.
learning by doing is the best way.
Yes.
What about you? What are your
Mm.
answers?
I like that idea actually that the community member suggested about giving them a model. So it could be a model, for example, of a text that is excellent and one that perhaps needs a little bit more improvement, and getting them to think, maybe with a partner, which one is better and why. So we are developing those metacognitive skills, right, to evaluate a piece of work. Um, and also, other things that we could do, for example, is to get them to, as you say, to write criteria. Again, we can give them the stems, yeah, to help them write criteria, and then using those criteria to self-assess their work. I think it's also important to read the self-assessments and give them a little bit of feedback, because then if there's something that is way off, yeah, for example, if they found it really challenging, but their self-assessing is excellent, then you do need to say why, perhaps they found
Mm.
it more challenging. And that's where it's okay to speak about these things if you build an environment of trust where we can discuss, things that perhaps didn't go so well and what we can do about it.
Yeah, that's a very good point,
Yeah.
actually. We
Mm.
reflect, I mean, giving feedback is very important, right? They will be really happy that
Yeah.
their voice is heard, and even maybe if in the case of using prompts, also providing that scaffolding to them.
Mm.
Some other
Absolutely.
ideas
Yeah.
also. Yeah.
Yeah.
What other ideas mentioned? So a consistent feedback over time. With
Mm.
consistent
Mhm.
feedback and encouragement, they become more independent and thoughtful in expressing their own learning journeys.
Mhm. That's nice. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm. You also mentioned resubmission and improvement of your work, which made me think of portfolios.
Mm.
Are you a fan of portfolios, Shirin?
I used portfolios with my secondary learners,
Hmm.
digital portfolios. So I asked them to create a Padlet, their own Padlet. So these were, of course, unlisted, not public, and they put the final. I mean, we were doing process writing. They were uploading the final version of their assignments onto their portfolios, and it
Hmm.
was like building up in time. They were really very excited about decorating in different ways and uploading as many final products as possible. But
Hmm.
there are different ways to do it, of course. I did it that way, and I found out that they really enjoyed this process, and we were
Hmm.
including a kind of self-assessment for each task, so they were also
Hmm.
um, responding to the assessments in
Hmm.
their own way. And
Hmm.
you have also some experience, right, with primary.
Yes, well, I love using portfolio, especially with primary. I use digital portfolios. So there are platforms where you can have the learners log in, and then they can draw, they can write, they can label pictures, they can write a short text if you want them to, or they can record, so they can practice their speaking as well. Um, and I think it's a fantastic way for them to collect the work that they've done during the year, and then getting them to self-assess and to see their progress. So comparing their work with previous ones
Mhm.
and getting them to self-assess, do you think that you are progressing, or did you do better this time? So it's giving them that ownership, right? And that visible progress for them, for the teacher, and also for parents. The good
Yeah.
thing about digital portfolios is that you can share them with parents, and then they've got all their work so they don't lose it, and the parents can see it. And it's a great way of communicating progress to parents as well, especially when perhaps you've got parents' meetings at the end of term and you need to make their progress visible. So it's a great way, I think, to self-assess and also to make that progress visible. It's very motivational. I think one of our community members said that learner-led assessment or self-assessment is works really well when they take responsibility of improving their own work, right? And the only way for them to do that is to compare what they've done before with what they're doing now, and to say, right, am I doing better? Did I write the text better? Do I have fewer spelling mistakes? So giving them, those two pieces of work for them to compare in order for them to see that progress. And portfolios are a great way of making all that work visible, so it doesn't get lost.
But you planned it at the very beginning, so it's part of your course, right? So it's part of
Hmm.
your whole course planning and also lesson planning. So each
Hmm.
time, perhaps you were encouraging them to do something on their portfolio. So,
Hmm.
but there are also some challenges, risks that teachers might face, right, when implementing portfolios. Did you have any negative experiences with them?
I wouldn't say negative. Perhaps, if you're using digital portfolios, you would need to train them into how to use the technology. But I think overall, whether it's digital or paper based, they need to feel proud, right, of their portfolio. So their portfolio needs to contain their best work. So it takes a little bit of organization on the teacher's part, um, and to explain that they can choose which work they put in their portfolio and which perhaps they don't want to, right? So if they, did a task, very badly, they don't have to put it in their portfolio. You can either say, right, you can leave that out, or I can give you the chance to resubmit. And then if they resubmit and it's much better, then that can go in their portfolio. So it's giving them the choice and that ownership to build their own collection of best work to show off their progress to the teacher and to the parents as well.
Yeah.
So it's more that kind of logistical training, right, of
Mhm.
getting them to choose what they put in their portfolio.
Yes, and also maybe for the other technical sides, peer learning might help. But it could be also paper based. In my son's school, they have paper based portfolios and they
Hmm.
have reflection days, so where they present and um, parents discover. So this could be also a paper-based portfolio on a
Yes,
poster, maybe
absolutely,
poster presentation.
absolutely. That's
Because I
right.
think these are life skills that in the future, in future education, higher education, they will have their portfolios submit their portfolios to the
Hmm.
universities, or
Hmm.
they will be presenting their work to others. So I think these are really important life skills that our learners will use in the future. So thank you so much, Nelson, for sharing. Let's wrap up. So finally, we talked about what self-assessment, why we should do it, what are the challenges, and what are the benefits of using self-assessment. And we
Hmm.
discussed some tools and portfolios. One of the tools we discussed, as well as some other little tools that can help our learners self assess. Do you have any final messages to the teachers about the portfolio use, maybe in terms of broader support? What should they do to start self assessment in their classrooms?
Well, I think it's important to get the school support as well, because some teachers may not use self-assessment or portfolios because they haven't done them before. So it's important to maybe build some kind of community within the school, so that the teachers who have done it before can support the ones that haven't, so that they can exchange ideas and they can perhaps observe each other's lessons, so that they can learn from each other, right? Because what we want is the greatest number of teachers and learners doing learner-led assessment as much as possible. So it's really hard to start on your own. Yeah. So it's important to kind of pair them up, perhaps with a buddy or with a more experienced teacher who's very enthusiastic about self-assessment, and then they can support each other. I think that kind of institutional support is very, very important, because um, we've all done something for the first time, and having a peer mentor or having a buddy or someone to support us is very important when we are experimenting with self-assessment or learner-led assessment.
Okay, great. Yeah, I totally agree with you. It should be a whole school approach. It's more efficient, and in terms of recognition of effort as well. So it shouldn't be. It needs to be done purposefully, with
Hmm.
a clear purpose, and then teachers can also evaluate the difference
Mhm.
between those students who reflect. And maybe it can be framed as a habit of reflection, not a one-off task. So this needs to be part of our planning. So
Mm.
we should definitely include that, not neglect self-assessment in our planning, in planning courses.
Mhm.
And yeah, we should also let parents know, yeah, this engaging parents understand those reflective practices can also be very helpful for the future. So thank you very much, Nelson, and thank you our community members for their contributions on the course as well as during the live session. So we look forward to seeing you next time, another
Thank you,
in
everyone.
another event. Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye bye.
How to see more of our videos on YouTube. When using a shared device, check you're logged into your YouTube account. Do this by tapping the profile on the main menu. When sure you're in the right account, select Search from the top menu. Search for the British Council Teaching English channel and select it. Look down the page for British Council Teaching English. Tap on it. This is our channel. To be alerted whenever we share a video, tap Subscribe. Then tap Subscribed. Select All to be notified of all our new videos. To see these notifications, tap on the bell in the top menu.